Sheriff Ozzie Knezovich talks with community leaders about issues in the public safety arena, sponsored by River Ridge Hardware.
Well, I hope everybody's having a good day, depending on what time you're watching the show. This is Sheriff Ozzie Knezovich with the Sheriff's Report. Today, we're going to talk about some of the things that I've seen in our local media. Some of the hot button issues that seem to be getting people's attention, a lot of people wanting to have discussions about. So I thought that we would do a show that kind of tells you a little bit about what's behind the scenes, what you're not being told. And let's face it, right now, for some reason, our media really is not doing deep dives and asking the hard questions, especially of activists. They're not. They're not pushing them to verify their claims or data. And if it was law enforcement doing that, I can assure you, they challenge the data immediately. They challenge anything that we bring forward immediately. And I've watched it over the years. And I think it's time that, as Paul Harvey used to say, for the rest of the story. So if we could pull up the first slide. As I stated, we're going to talk about things in the news and what you're not being told about it. Our local news, over the weekend, Krem ran a story with a headline that says, "We're the third deadliest police force in the nation," meaning the Spokane Police Department. And it goes on, the title, "Spokane activists rally against police brutality at Riverfront Park this last Saturday." And the activists want to claim that, that the Spokane Police Department is the third deadliest in the nation. Now, Krem does kind of try to do a little bit of a disclaimer. When you read the article, they point out that, well, try to contextualize what you're seeing here. One additional officer-involved shooting may move SPD to the top of the list, and despite not having as many deaths as larger areas. I'm going to explain to you the math and what's going on in reference to this type of reporting and this type of claim by activists. A friend of mine once said, Ozzie, numbers never lie, but liars always use numbers. That's always stuck in my mind. And I've found over the years that, depending on how you want to look at a number, how you want to view it, how you present it, questions asked about, you can make numbers dance and do whatever you want them to do. And I've never really liked that. I've never liked that type of philosophy, if you will. We live in what they claim to be a postmodern era, where they say that the truth doesn't matter anymore. There is no truth. It's their truth, or it's your truth. I'm sorry, folks. There is the truth. And our first president, George Washington, had a saying that, the truth will prevail, depending on the amount of pain you're willing to put in to get it out. Well, it's time that we start looking for truth rather than running on pure emotion. Right now, our nation runs on pure emotion on every issue that comes up. And I will tell you that, and it's basically emotional warfare right now. And whenever you have emotional warfare, the first casualty of emotional warfare are the truth and logic. And, quite frankly, if you listen close enough to one side or the other, one side claims that logic is now white supremacist. Why? Because if you really dived into things, if you really look at things hard, it's not like it appears when you're looking through the purely emotional lens. Because when you're looking through a purely emotional lens, you really struggle to find truth. And our country is based on the ability to function. Its form of government is based on character, truth, because if we don't have that, there's no way you hold this type of society together. And I believe that there are forces out there that realize that, and they're using this against you, the citizen, and they keep you emotionally charged. That's what the 24-hour news cycle is meant to do. I spent a day with a person that does documentaries, and he said, you know, Sheriff, here's the reality. There's not enough news to go around to feed a 24-hour news cycle, so they look to and create controversy. And they can keep that churning, keep you churning, and keep you churning, and that's what happens. Well, that's a sad thing, because when you talk to older reporters, they, 10 years ago they were telling me, Ozzie, investigative journalism is dead. It died with the 24-hour news cycle, which is a tragic thing for all of us, because we depend on the information provided so we can make proper decisions in which direction our country actually goes. I mean, think about that. And maybe it's time we slow down and actually try to, and this is really tough, trust me, I do a huge amount of reading just to try to find a glimmer of what the true facts are in any event. And you have to go through multiple sources. You can't just rely on your extreme left-leaning source or your extreme right-leaning source, and good luck trying to find something in the middle. And I don't listen to social media because there's too much bad information put out. So we are in a quandary. We as a nation are in a true, desperate peril, because we no longer can trust the one thing that our founding fathers said is very necessary to our form of government, which is a free press. That's why the press has a constitutionally protected role in our nation. But with that constitutionally protected role comes a great responsibility of telling it straight and letting you make the decisions. Not them, not the opinion. If we can go to the next slide, and we'll talk about what it is and how this information got put out, that SPD is the third deadliest agency in the nation, and because it's not. This information comes from an organization called SCAR, and the activist that was interviewed is a guy by the name of Anwar Peace, and they have certain claims. And in the news story, it says that SCAR got this information from the FBI, UCI reports and things like that. To a point, that's true to a point. But the true genesis of this information comes from mappingpoliceviolence.com. That is a .com, folks. And they put this information out, and part of that information is on the screen right now. And if you take a look at that information, you'll see SPD sitting in the number 3 position on the left side of the screen, and it has a box that you can click on and hover over, and it brings up other information. We'll cover that information. But I want you also to pay attention to the graphic on the right side of the screen, because, and I have it highlighted, that's SPD, because on that one, when you don't make the magic numbers dance, SPD is somewhere down in the mid-40s as far as the top 100 in the nation. And you can't compare demographics like that. There are influential areas of our country of our county that certain crimes just don't happen. But you moved a couple of miles east, west, north, south, and you'll find those crimes. So to try to make these leaps that this group, this mapping police violence group makes, is really unique math, and it's called, disproportionality math is what I call it, all right? Because that's what you're going to hear continually about proportionality, disproportionality. It's the math behind it and how these numbers dance. Let's go to the next screen. So, as you see, SPD's numbers are sitting there, and it gives the population, and I believe that this demographic is based on the 2010 model, if I remember this particular graph correctly. So it gives the population overall of Spokane, the overall number of police shootings in a 7-year period, 2007 to 2013. Then it breaks down further into demographics. And at the bottom, you'll see that African Americans in Spokane are 3.3 times more likely to be shot by police officers than white citizens of this community. But if you really start looking at the numbers and start doing the hard math, it says that there were 17 officer-involved shootings in that 7-year period. But it goes and shows that there were 9.9 officer-involved shootings per year. Now I want you to think about that and just put that in the back of your mind. We're going to cover that. Then go down a little bit further, and it shows that there was one African-American subject that was involved in an officer-involved shooting. One. But then it says that there was 27.9 per year. Now just think about that. Then it goes down and it says that there were 12 whites involved in officer-involved shootings, and then there's no more numbers, but if you had one African-American and 12 whites, that's 13. What happened to the other 4 shootings that they mentioned? So we're starting to see a little bit of a interesting dynamic in the math already. So let's go to the next slide. So again, SCAR claims that these numbers come from FBI data, and Spokane Community Against Racism is SCAR, and they claim, but I showed you where the numbers actually come from. If you look at the bottom of your screen there, you'll see mappingpoliceviolence.org and their website. That's where this comes from. And this came out, I believe, last year. So this is recycled information. And again, this 2007 to 2013, and it says 17 officer-involved shootings during that time period, which is truly 2.42 officer-involved shootings per year, not 9.9. Now, sure, how did they get there? Well, they converted SPD's data to per million population. SPD doesn't have a million population. In order to get to a million, SPD is under 250,000 as far as the jurisdiction that it serves. I believe the city's population hovers probably around 219,000. So we're not quite at a quarter mil. So what they've done is basically times everything by kind of 4, kind of. If you look at 2.42 times 4, you get right around 9.9. So it's kind of how it worked. But that's what they did. They had to convert SPD to a million population, as if the assumption can be made that if we had 4 times the population, there would be 4 times the officer-involved shootings. You can't go there. You don't know that that is going to happen. You don't know what kind of economic development is going to happen to spawn that type of surge in population. You may end up with a more influential or affluent community versus a community that's in decay. And folks, all those factors do matter to crime. Contrary to what you want to, the other side wants to feed you, those factors do influence crime. So let's take a look at a deeper dive. So if there were 9.9 officer-involved shootings in that year time frame, that means in 7 years there was what? 69.3 officer-involved shootings. That's what the math would dictate. And that does not equal 17, the actual number in 7 years, but that's what it becomes, kind of, if you times by 4. Kind of. Not really, but it's unique math. You have to, they'll actually show you the formulas if you go deeper. And it's a torturous experiment to go through. Next slide. So Scar and Anwar Peace's claims is that, and again this is mapping police violence, that the population of our African American population in Spokane is about 4,474. There was one individual that was African American that was involved in an officer-involved shooting with SPD during that time frame. And that one becomes 27.9 per year. Now, Sheriff, I thought you said you had to times it by 4, and that I told you kind of. You need to pay close attention because it really gets confusing from here. Kind of, because 1 times 4 is, last I checked, still 4. Contrary to some activists that say that 2 plus 2 doesn't equal 4 anymore. That is a direct quote from an activist. So you have 27.9, which means that in that 7-year period, that's 27.9 is per year, times 7, 195.3 African Americans were involved in an OIS. And that's what the numbers dictate, kind of. But wait a minute, according to their total, it was only 69.3 total OISs in that same year. How do you get to 195 and those solely being African American? I told you the math is excruciating to go through. And I want you to consider this. The true per year average is 2.42. Now, if that's the case, and we talk just proportionality or proportionality, and this is where that argument truly falls flat on its face because it is not a true matrix of what goes on in a community. Disproportionality based on population, demographic. If one of those individuals during that year happened to be a person of color, suddenly they become 41% of those individuals involved in officer-involved shootings that year, which means that the 5% of the population of Spokane County, which it's slightly under that now, of African Americans, and according to proportionality, there should never be any representation in any crime data above, and I'm just going to round it to 5%. There should be no African American statistics that reach above 5% based on proportionality. But if one individual is involved in an officer-involved shooting, they become 41%, and that makes it disproportional. Now, let's talk about overall use of force. All it takes is a very few officer use of force with African American suspects to break the proportionality barrier. And very few, it happens rapidly. There's why it is a false narrative that you're being fed. Next slide. The white population, again, it shows that there were 12 officer-involved shootings involving white people, which equates out to 8.6 per year according to their math. And when you do that, that means 60.2 over the 7-year time period, officer-involved shootings involving white people. So if you take the number of officer-involved shootings over that 7-year time frame and add the white and the African-American population together involved in officer-involved shootings, it brings us to 255.5 officer-involved shootings in that same 7-year period. And I can assure you, last I checked, 255.5 does not equal 17. Okay, well, Sheriff, it also says that you're 3 times more likely as an African American to be shot than a white person. How did they get that? Well, take a look at the numbers there, and when you start timesing, 60 times 3.3, you get somewhere kind of in the area of 195. Again, kind of. It's just kind of math. So, and it also says that Latinx people are 0.0 times the rate of white people. As a matter of fact, they don't even show any demographic being involved in OISs involving the Latinx population. Next slide. So, questions that you should be asking, mapping police violence, SCAR, and Anwar Peace, are these. How does one OIS in a 7-year period involving a member of the African American community become 195.3 in that same 7-year period? How? Because of proportionality math, proportional math. That's how it works. The next question is, how does one in a 7-year period involving a member of our African American community become 3.3 times the number of 12 officer-involved shootings involving a member of the white community? Because 3.3 times 1 still equals 3.3, not 12. And this is where CREM's disclaimer that we showed at the top kind of comes into play here. The average annual rate of killings by police officers must be contextualized, but nobody took the time now, did they? They never took the time to do a deep dive into SCAR, mappingpoliceviolence.org, or Anwar Peace's rhetoric. They just fed you that rhetoric with the big headline, SPD, 3rd deadliest in the nation. What a disservice. What a disservice to this community. What a disservice to the law enforcement officers who work for SPD. It is a disservice to all of us because, folks, we are in the nature and we are in the era of demonization. We demonize, we label. Let me tell you a secret. When you demonize any demographic of our community, you have hurt the entire community. The entire community goes down. Next slide. So I showed you two graphs, one on the right, one on the left. This was the one on the right, and shows SPD somewhere in the mid-40s. Next slide. That's just a closer view of it. Next slide. This is a demographic that I found. I collect a lot of data research. And in this one, I believe SPD somewhere like 12th, and that was in 2015, 2016 timeframe. Next slide. And then we get into more comments by Anwar Peace and his claims that he makes for SCAR. And we're going to dive a little bit more into that in our next segment. This is going to be a multi-segment piece, folks. So we're going to dive a little bit deeper into that next segment here very shortly. I hope this gives you something to think about. I hope that this challenges you to stop just accepting the rhetoric. And maybe contact our media and go, will you please do your jobs? Will you please challenge this rhetoric? Because they are truly doing a disservice to you, to your community, to your children. Because if we don't stop this nonsense, it's your children that live this. This is Sheriff Ozzie Knezovich. Have a great day.
Here at River Ridge Hardware Garden Center, where we have all the plants and flowers that will spruce up your yard, from the lilacs for Spokane's Lilac City to awesome hanging baskets and pots that you can actually put the hanging baskets in. Here at River Ridge Hardware, we want to help you set up your landscape needs. Neighbors helping neighbors at River Ridge Hardware.
Thanks for watching. Ask the host a question, recommend a guest, or check out any of our other programs on Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or SpokaneTalksMedia.com. Sponsored by River Ridge Hardware.